Welcome to another Consent Dojo, where we are going to build up our muscle around consent and navigating the world of being human. It's my pleasure always to invite amazing friends and colleagues to ask them about their particular perspective on consent. Because consent, a single word, seemingly simple, it's not easy, and there's so many different facets of it, and it's my joy to be able to host this and learn. There's so much to learn. And I also want to welcome those who are here live as attendees and those who are going to be viewing this later. Okay. So I'm Midori, and I specialize in sexuality education. I'm a sexologist, as well as I run a company for sexuality education, founder of Fort FM Women's Dominance Intensive. And I am always, always trying to be better around consent. I often screw up, but I'm hoping I'm getting better. And today I have the thrill of a new friend that I have made, and I am so excited to have this conversation. I'm even more excited that someday I'm going to get to be back in New York and talk about all this over coffee. But in the meantime, I want to welcome you to meeting Brooke M. Haney, they, them pronoun. And I'm going to read the official bio thing here, and then you're going to find out more about them. Okay. Brooke was one of the first 50 intimacy coordinators recognized as qualified by the SAG-AFTRA, yay union, yay actors and media labor union. I'm all sorts of pro on that. Creator of the Actors Warm Down and editor of the Intimacy Coordinators Guidebook, Specialties for Stage and Screen. Brand new book. Check it out. We'll put the link in the chat, all right?
In which
They're
Midori
based,
is interviewed.
yay! And yeah, and I'm so glad we found each other. Oh my God. They're based in New York and love to travel for work. And they're most passionate about working on queer stories and have worked for CBS, Paramount Plus, Amazon Prime, HBO, 20th Century Television, Disney, Warner Brothers. I think I've heard of those. Yeah. Yeah. And on films and theater. And if you're interested, I want to make sure to check out Brooke's book, The Intimacy Coordinator's Guidebook, Specialty for Stage and Screen. Link will be in, well, if you're looking at this later, look in the comments. And if you're looking at this live, look in the chat area. And there's also going to be a discount code, right? And the website is Brooke, that's BROOKEM, Haney, HANEY.com. That's the official stuff. So I won't launch in. And what the heck is an intimacy coordinator?
Yeah. I still, when I tell people what I do, I have to say, do you know what that is? Because otherwise people can jump to all kinds of assumptions, all of which I would be happy for them to assume, quite frankly. But what an intimacy coordinator actually does is I work with directors in TV and film around their vision for scenes of sex, nudity, hyperexposure, and other things, and with the actors around their boundaries and their consent, and help make those two things work together to tell a compelling story. And that's what I do.
And this business, or the official title, it's not, it's officially kind of newish, but in some way or another, various people have been doing that. Is that correct?
That's absolutely true. I think, there's almost, I feel like almost nothing that's actually new in the world, but things get relabeled and done in different ways. Before the Me Too movement, very few people were doing this as a job, as a specific job. Wardrobe might have been doing the part where I provide robes and modesty garments, and an AD, that's the assistant director on set, might have been closing set. Like many of the things that I do were being done by people, but there was no one person designated to do it. And then through the bravery of the Me Too movement, producers started being willing to pay for it. In theater, it happened a little sooner. In fact, in Chicago, there was a movement called the Chicago Theater Standards in which a bunch of non-union theater professionals banded together and created some standards. And in that document from 2015 is the mention of using intimacy designers for scenes of nudity and simulated sex. So it was actually happening in theater a little bit sooner. And it really goes back a long way. Tonya Sina, who was the first person who has published anything on this, did that in 2006.
Hmm.
But if you think about like Bell Hooks or Audre Lorde and Black women's culture of care,
Hmm.
that is part of what plays into intimacy professionals, or like the consent in the queer community at kink parties, in the BDSM community. All of those skills are the things that we bring to the job. We didn't invent them on our own.
And yet it was something that wasn't officially in place.
Yeah, that's right. That there wasn't, it wasn't valued, is what it came
Okay.
down to. It wasn't valued. And then when all of the abuses in the industry were uncovered, the people in power realized they needed to value it and were willing to pay it as a position.
Okay. So, question,
Hmm.
how much is it really valued in the industry? And I'm saying industry because that's really huge.
Yeah.
You've got live theater, you've got
Mhm.
mainstream Broadway, you got off Broadway, you've got uh mainstream movies, TV shows, but also like independently created things all over the place. But in the let's say the larger paycheck world,
Mhm.
how much is it really valued, and how much is lip service, and how much is oh, I got to bring on an intimacy coordinator?
Mhm. I think it really depends from project to project. We were talking
Hmm.
about Birder. There's a film coming out by Amnon Laurie, directed by Nate Dushku and starring Mark Emery. It's called Birder. It's a queer psychological thriller. Nope, a queer erotic thriller. There we go. Yeah, erotic queer thriller that I worked on. Almost completely queer team. And Nate Dushku and Amnon Laurie and the producer, Christy Brookshire, from the very beginning said, we will not do this project without an intimacy coordinator. They brought
Hmm.
one on before they even cast the show and had someone do a risk assessment and write the casting notices. And I was on set every single day of the film except for one. And there was even an intimacy team. Chelsea pasted some of the prep. I joined her for prep and was on set. Leo Mock was the assistant. I mean, we had it covered and it was very valued. And I think the results are really special. However, and then I would say, even like the projects I've worked on CBS, I worked on East New York and Elsbeth. You know, it's CBS. Nobody's having simulated sex, really, but there's kisses and, you know, things like that. But they're still willing to pay for someone to be there because they care that much. And then there are occasionally times you go on set where they're like, yeah, 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 yeah. So I think it is still a work in progress. And the folks that really understand the job value it the most. And what I mean by that is some people think it's just, I'm just there to protect the actors. But actually, the intimacy coordinator, yes, is going to do that, but also is going to help with the choreography. So you're hiring someone that is an expert in boundaries and consent, but is also an expert in physical storytelling. And so
Hmm.
that storytelling of the intimacy is going to be better because you have someone who has spent considerable time and energy studying how do we tell those stories authentically in an interesting way with humor, whatever it is that it needs.
Well, I'm looking forward to this growing, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, me
And
too.
today, as there's a position,
Mm-hmm.
now I'm also seeing various training programs. Oh,
Yeah.
we got a question on the name of the movie, and that's The Birder. It is also in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so we now have certifications.
Mm-hmm.
Can you
Yeah.
tell us a bit about that?
Sure. So some training organizations offer certification and you go through a certain number of levels of training and then you get a cert a certificate, like you would a diploma from
Mhm.
a college. And you don't need a certificate to do this work. I don't have one. Um, and it's one way to get really good training. Another way would be to look at all the things required of the job and get them from a variety of places,
Mhm.
which is one of the ways that I did it. Um, the key is that you really do need to have all the training. And that
Mm.
means training in boundaries and consent, in working with folks with disabilities, especially non apparent disability, working with people of different sizes,
Mhm.
working culturally competent,
Mm.
um, and then expertise in choreography and the various ways in which people can have sex. And I think that's really important because if you only go in with your own personal experience, that's not going to tell interesting stories. You really have to study.
Mhm. Mhm. Mm.
And I've probably
A
left some things out.
as you were talking about this, okay, it really literally just popped into my mind,
Yeah.
as you were talking about this, that there was a movie that I was brought in as a choreographer.
Hmm.
And so, okay, so those of you who are watching, I don't have certification or industry official training as intimacy consultant or intimacy coordinator. I think there are a lot of different titles, I believe,
Hmm.
and a lot of different ranges of responsibility. But given my expertise, I have been brought in to either photographers, photo shoots, or film, cinema, etc., and brought in as a consultant. And I looked this up, and I actually remember the name thing because I think it was around 2005
Hmm.
that a director in Canada brought me in to choreograph for a independent movie called The Ache. It's a Canadian contemporary Chinese Canadian ghost story.
Ooh, yeah.
And the director, Keith Locke, wanted a scene in which the main character, in interacting with a Chinese ghost,
Hmm.
is bound and suspended.
Hmm.
And he had an image, he had like a vague image, and didn't quite sure how it was going to happen. And this is before like rope bondage was all sorts of popular, right?
Hmm.
And so I think he had a bit of an image on that. And I was like, okay, given um, Chinese cultural and Japanese cultural, if you're bringing in Japanese rope imagery and this is Chinese Canadian, we got a whole nother layer of history we got to deal with. And the conversation I had with the director was, what are you trying to achieve?
Hmm.
And what I ended up suggesting was series of cloth,
Hmm.
stretchy cloth that then she's trapped and bound in.
Hmm.
And so, because the Sino-Japanese relationship and history was not part of the story,
Hmm.
so now we have this just fabric in the air, uh, and it was such a pleasure to work with him. And this is well before Me Too. And here's this like very conscientious indie director struggling to make this amazing movie,
Hmm.
to tell a story, and bringing in somebody from a whole nother country. And it was such a joy to have him listen to my input.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would think that, let's see, in the 90s, I've consulted with and did some of the rope styling. Okay, so this is like in porn, right?
Hmm.
Um, and okay, so letting the porno cat out of the bag. So it
Hmm.
was a rope bondage, kinky, um, porn shoot, and they brought me in to not to be in front of the camera, but to do the tying,
Uh-huh.
but also to talk to the various actors and say, okay, I want you to hold it this way, look this way. Okay, person receiving the rope, how does this feel? And then um, and that was in the 90s, and then the ache, and then occasionally I'll get brought in for really satisfying experience recently was a photo shoot of an erotic photographer, very mainstream, beautiful, soft
Mhm.
erotica. He hired bondage models, and I came in, I sat down and spoke with them about their experience, and the photographer, big, tall, white cis guy, stepped back, way in the back, had coffee, let me take over, and the stories that I heard from these professional and semi-professional bondage models were horrific
Mhm.
on what they're used to on this fringe industry set.
Mhm.
And the joy of getting to work with by changing the narrative for them and this photographer. So I, I I've been brought in on a by case basis, but God, the horror stories.
Mhm. I
Yeah.
think that's the key though when we're talking about value and qualification is
Mm-hmm.
these independent producers really saw the value in what you brought
Mm-hmm.
and you had the expertise to give them what they needed. You didn't need a certification because you had your lifetime of experience and expertise. Um, but what I was thinking when you said that that's so interesting is I think it's fun that the first intimacy coordinator ever was on The Deuce on HBO, which was about the porn industry. And now I know, do you know Aorta Films?
Yeah.
It's a like ethical queer porn company. I know
Mm-hmm.
that they've brought intimacy coordinators in on their sets recently because I have friends that work there. In fact, I know April Flores is an intimacy coordinator that's worked
Oh,
there.
lovely person. Yeah.
Yeah, April's
And
amazing.
one would think that, oh, it's porn. Why would you need intimacy
hmm
coordinator? Everyone knows what's going on.
hmm And yet, communication is great. And someone like April being the IC on a porn project is perfect because April is an adult film actor. And I think that can be one of the things that can be really useful is if you're looking to help try and tell a story, having the identity of either the actors or the characters can be really helpful in telling the story.
So identity
Mhm.
and culture. So far, we've already talked about queer identities. I was
Mhm.
also in reference to the Canadian film talking about do you want to bring in the Sino-Japanese history and what does this particular okay, so cultural competency,
Mhm.
right? Kink also. Oh my God, kink in media, mainstream media. Oh,
Yeah.
but could you talk to me a bit about cultural competency in terms of consent and intimacy work?
Yeah. I think this is a way in which probably we're still learning
Mhm.
exactly what level of competency and intimacy a coordinator would have. My belief is you don't have to be so knowledgeable that you could dramaturg the story necessarily, but you do need to be knowledgeable about the history and how it takes place in present day and how it affects the storytelling or the actors who are telling the story. I think a really good example is Olivia Troy was the intimacy coordinator on Bonding. Not
Oh,
the first
I
season,
know Troy.
yeah, but the
Yeah,
second season. So the first season,
yeah.
Bonding came out, the kink community, we were like, thumbs down, right? But the
Mhm.
producers were like, okay, well, we actually want to do better. So they brought Troy in, and not just as an intimacy coordinator, but as a writer. So Troy was in the writer's room, in fact, wrote two of the episodes, and also worked with them, brought in folks from the BDSM and kink community to be the actors in roles so that it
Yeah.
was more authentic. And the second season was so much better.
Oh my God, I'm gonna have to drop a note to Troy and go, yay.
Yeah, do. But I think
Mhm.
that's the key, right? Like, not just any intimacy coordinator could have done that because not every intimacy coordinator has that level of cultural competency in BDSM and kink, which was important for that story.
Yeah.
Similarly, I think what you were saying about the Canadian film you worked on,
Mhm.
like they needed someone who, if they wanted to do it well and respectfully, they needed someone who knew enough about the differences between different cultures' relationships to rope in order for that to be a like non-distracting, authentic, interesting story. And then your thought of doing it with fabric was so great because it also like plays into that ghost feeling. Yeah.
It was really pretty. It was really satisfying because, yeah, watching the once in the setup, watching the actor cut loose and
Mm-hmm.
play in the three dimension. Um, unofficially, not unofficially. I've also had the opportunity with um, fringe performers and like kink subculture performers,
Mm-hmm.
and they're coming up with performances, right? Uh, and I had a really great conversation with a couple of conscientious performers who wanted to do a rope bondage performance for the kink culture, which is often very white,
Mm-hmm.
and has consulted me about how cultural representations, music, Japanese music or not Japanese music, kimono or not kimono, where's cultural appropriation and where is appreciation, and is this, and so I had really good
Mm-hmm.
conversation as a consultant in shaping their performance. And you would think in a kink subculture and with ropey things or bondage things that there would be, it's all okay. Well, it's not.
Yeah.
And I was really grateful that these performers were like, hey, we'd like to consult with you around this. And much in the way you were talking about bonding and Troy, I was able
Yeah.
to help in this. And also, so they wouldn't inadvertently step into offense.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Because well-meaning folks can make a mistake just out of like the ignorance of not knowing.
Yeah.
And
Oh, there's a
especially because
mhm,
so much BDSM and kink has been so badly represented, if your education in BDSM and kink has been from popular media,
mhm.
you are in danger of just replicating it because that's what you know.
That's just so painful. I think I see a comment here from someone around bonding and Troy's work here. Yes, I loved how much they learned and changed the second season. The storyline was great too. It addresses so much rather than push it aside and under a rug. Accountability uh, has to have acknowledging the harm and how to be better.
Yeah,
I've
agreed.
also got another question from someone here, and I was waiting for this to come up. How does one become an intimacy coordinator?
Yeah, great question. I think there's a difference between how I became an intimacy coordinator and how someone does it now. Because I've been doing it in theater since around 2016. I use that as the date that I started because it's the first time I presented research at a conference. Um, and I didn't even use the title till 2018 because that's when I discovered the title even existed. Um,
Hmm.
so for me, it was a lot of life experiences and reinventing the wheel on or inventing the wheel on my own, and then discovering other people were doing it and learning from my colleagues.
Hmm.
What I think people can do now, which is so exciting, is there are schools you can go to. Um, I mean, of course, as someone who wrote a book, I would say, well, a great place to start would be to read the Intimacy Coordinator's Guidebook, Specialties for Stage and Screen. Um, though, actually, I would say to read Chelsea Pace's book, Staging Sex, would actually be the first place to go. Um, because it is a very foundational book. And in fact, when I wrote my book, I thought of it as what would be a good sequel to Staging Sex. Um,
What's
and
the
I
author's
think
name again?
Chelsea Pace.
Okay, thank you.
Uh, and I do actually recommend that might be a good place to start. That, and then anything you can find that's free. because it can be very expensive to go through training. So start by doing everything possible that you can find that's free. And if after doing all of that, you're still really interested, then start paying for training. Um, and I think talking to people about what it's like on stage, it's very long, very hard days sometimes. I love it. It fills me with joy. For some folks, though, it depletes them. So
Mm,
figuring out if it's the right job for you, I think, is really important. And then what we were talking about, choosing whether you want to go through a certification program, or we talked about SAG-AFTRA. SAG-AFTRA has a list of different kinds of training you have to be on their registry of qualified intimacy professionals. And then you have to do 60 days on set. Once you've done all of that, you're qualified. And that's another way to go
mm,
through it. I know there's always the question of like, how do you get on set if you're not qualified, and how do you, yeah. But yeah, in order to be on this list, you have to have worked as an intimacy coordinator for 60 days. Um, so, but I think there's, it's an apprentice industry. So you study with someone.
hmm. You know, I'm like thinking, right? And then I'm like, Midori, you fool, you've already got a bunch of projects you're working on.
Yeah,
Maybe I'll just
absolutely.
maybe I'll stay at the specialty place.
Yeah. Or maybe afterward, you and I talk and we see where you're at. Yeah. Hmm.
Mm. Uh, Before we started recording, I mentioned that fantastic New York Times article.
Hmm.
And New York Times has actually covered quite a lot about intimacy coordinator, but they had a huge article. I think it was the Sunday Times magazine or something on intimacy coordinators being brought into the American Ballet Company and ballet and intimacy coordinator. And I thought that was a really great way to introduce the world to this work.
Yeah, I think so too. I think even people who maybe don't understand staging simulated sex, they understand ballet.
Mhm.
Um, and things about dance that are really interesting. Sarah Lazoff, who I believe is mentioned in that article, worked with me on the chapter on dance in my book. And one of the things she talked about is the hierarchicalness of dance historically, where originally dance was for the courts.
Mhm.
And because of that, as it's trickled down into what we see as dance today, particularly concert ballet, it's still very hierarchical. We have our prima ballerinas. The choreographer is like the god of the the project. And so for dancers to learn how to be able to say, I have a boundary around what I'm willing to do is just not a way that they were trained. I think Nicole Perry, I think, is the one in the book who says, when we train dancers, we literally train them not to speak. And so then how do you later tell them to have a voice and to be able to consent or not? And so I think dance is a really interesting way to look at this movement
Mhm.
for sure.
And I'm sure they're capable of I'm assuming that they're capable of speaking of their physical abilities,
Yeah.
limitation, capabilities, and bandwidth, but
Mhm.
the emotional is a whole different thing.
Exactly. I mean, I think that's exactly right. They know that their body is their instrument and they have to protect it. And I think across the board culturally, at least in the States, that's what we've been taught. Like you push yourself as hard as you can, go, 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 go. And of course, if you're so sick you can't go to work, stay home. But like it hasn't been really till recently that people even use the term mental health day. And I think a lot of people still use it as a joke, but
Yeah,
actually that's a part of our body that we have to take care of.
right.
So yeah, I think you're really hitting on it. And dance is a, like microcosm of the experience.
And something that is considered such verified high art form.
Yes.
Um, I noticed that somebody had raised their hand. If anyone has questions, please feel free to put it in the Q&A box or in the chat, and I will share that. Hmm. In terms of the setting the boundary of one's mental health. Athletes recently have been getting a load of crap
Mhm.
for saying that this is not good for my mental health. I mean, Naomi Osaka, my God, got just a, a rash of crap for that.
Mhm. Yeah.
Huh.
I mean, I think it's like blatantly ingrained in our culture.
Mm,
And I actually think COVID helped us. I'd never be
mm,
grateful to COVID because it was awful. But I do think because of the pause for a lot of folks, people were able to say, wait a second. And we really don't have anyone who hasn't experienced trauma. So we are learning more that we need to take care of ourselves. We need to choose how we value
mhm,
our success and our time. Um, I think that's things intimacy coordinators are thinking about a lot because when the industry first started, there were so few people able to do it that those of us that were working a lot, and it was very easy to burn out. And with schools and people coming up, that's not true anymore. And in fact, the industry is very slow currently. Um, but it also is giving the opportunity for us to say, in order to do this work well, I need to come as my best self. And I think
What
that's true of most jobs. I really do.
what what do you do to keep the joy centered and keep from the crispy?
I have some boundaries around what I'll work on.
Hmm.
Um, I won't work on projects that have non consent disguised as romance. So
Oh,
the
that trope.
Yeah, yeah. So I won't work on that. And I'm currently doing a lot of thinking about when we sexualize underage characters for the adult gaze. Um, so I don't mean a high school show made for high school and a high school audience, because
Hmm.
obviously, like, high schoolers have sex, right? Um, But I mean, when you make a high school aged show where the audience is meant to be in their 30s, I'm thinking that I'm going
Yeah.
to have a boundary around that. So part of that is that I have boundaries. And then part of it is my partner and I talk a lot about what projects I will take on. I had a potential
Hmm.
opportunity to leave the country for 10 weeks on a show recently, and the money would have been great. I'm
Hmm.
not lying about that. But we talked a lot about the things that were going on in our life and was that the right decision for us right now?
Hmm.
And so I think about that too. And I have a therapist, right? Like, I do the things that I need to do to take care of myself.
Nice.
I have my own closure practices after a shoot because I recognize that I have to take care of me if I'm going to come back the next day and take care of others.
Your aftercare. What are those?
Yes, it depends on the project.
Hmm.
Um, Sometimes it's just like a brief, like breathing meditation. I tend to sit quietly with myself and ask myself, this is part of the after warm down, but it works for me in so many places. But I say, what's something that I did well today? And I honor it. What's something I wish I could have done differently? And I note it, name it, and then I choose to let it go. And do I have an artistic goal that I'm working on? And how have I made steps toward it today? So I do that every time.
Oh my God,
Some
that's beautiful.
Thank you. Um, and then sometimes it's a bath,
Hmm.
or if I've worked on something with a lot of heavy trauma, I might do a little bit of yoga and like letting it out on breath and then dancing. Yep, exactly. Yeah, because when we work on something that's stressful, we go like this, right? So we need
Hmm.
to go back. We need to go like this. We need to open ourselves back up. So those are some of mine.
Your closure exercise, I want to like cross stitch that onto a pillow. Oh my God,
Great.
those are so good.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a question from the audience,
Hmm.
okay, of quote, I'm a professional photographer. Um, based out of the Bay Area in California. I've done some adult film photography work, but looking to do more.
Mhm.
As a photographer, should we also act as intimacy coordinators? Unquote.
Well, that's a great question. I love that question. Um, I guess I'm curious if you mean should you do both things, or if I think what you mean is during a shoot, should you also be working as an intimacy coordinator during your shoot? I think what
Mhm,
I would say is if you're the photographer, you are not the intimacy coordinator, but you can be a consent forward photographer. Um, and the reason I think that's different, depending on what's going on. Now, if you're hired, let's say someone hires you to do a boudoir shoot, then they have power, right? They've hired you. So, yes, having great conversations with them about what do you consent? What do you want? How do you want this to look? That could work really evenly. However, if you're the one hiring the model, potentially, then you have a certain amount of power over them. And in that case, you're not equipped to be the intimacy person because the intimacy
mhm,
person needs to not have an agenda. Their
mhm.
job is really to help negotiate. But I think your question shows that you have a desire to be a consent forward photographer. And I think that goes a long way. And I think that's really actually where all of the industry needs to go is everyone thinking about how can I add consent into the way that I work, not just think about I must hire someone to check this box and be in charge of it. Because it really
Mhm.
does take us all.
Um, my 2 cents on this, and the person confirmed that that is also what they meant, is should they be doing both at the point of a shoot? I like your point about if the, client hires the photographer, even still, I think it would be even in that case,
Mm,
as and this is speaking to the photographer asking the question of, it might be nice to offer the client an option
mm,
would you like somebody else on set? And there's definitely the power dynamic, whether you are hiring, but especially if you're hiring a model,
mhm.
but even being hired by a client who wants their boudoir photography, there's formal and informal power dynamic.
Mhm,
Now, if let's say I'm hiring a boudoir photographer for the first time,
mhm.
I don't know, and I might not be somebody who has agency and my own comfort in
Yep.
setting a boundary. And I have heard several horrific situations of um, rope stylists and photographers exploiting that power dynamic.
Mhm,
I was actually doing this rope styling, and the
mhm,
photographer that hired both me as stylist, not
mhm,
intimacy coordinator, but I ended up unofficially doing that, and model.
mhm.
Um, in the middle of the person tied up, the photographer asks if the model is available for a date.
Oh, no.
I stepped right on in. Um, but I think for a consent forward artist, could be a photographer, could be a video shooter, to offer an option of I can have somebody else. And from a artist perspective, if I were the photographer, and I've done photo work, I can't concentrate on my craft of looking at the compositions, of the lighting, of the details. I'm having to look at where's the focal point. Is that particular thing? Oh my God, there's like a piece of trash in the background. Um, I'm going to notice the performer's facial expression as suiting the story I'm trying to tell.
Mhm,
But I'm not going to have the capacity
mhm.
to be sensitive even as I really give a damn about consent. Now, if I try to do both, um, caring about caring about everyone's well-being and creating this artistic work, they're both going to be compromised. I'm going to be doing half-ass in both.
Absolutely. And that's what I say to directors on set if they are hesitant to have an intimacy coordinator. I say, you know what? You have someone that you trust to do the lighting, and you have someone you trust to be the director of photography, and someone you trust for wardrobe. I am not here to take any of your control. You tell me your vision, and I am here to hold that vision and make sure you get the best out of the intimacy parts. And I think, yeah, absolutely, a still photographer could do the same thing. The idea of offering, hey, I have a collection of intimacy people I work with. Would would that be helpful for you to have on set? Would be amazing. And I also think a thing you said that's
Mhm,
really important, Midori, is this idea of power. I don't think I mentioned it when we talked about areas of training, but that is definitely one of them because in any situation, there is a power dynamic, right? Like, I am on your show, it's your show, right? But I wrote a book that you wrote for, you know, but you've been in the community longer than me, and that's a place I desire to have a lot of experience. And I'm white, right? Like all of these things play into power
mhm,
dynamics. And in any, when you add that it is a business interaction,
mhm.
that's really, uh, it really just like notches it up.
Oh, there's a great question here. Somebody asked, what is aftercare? I'd like to address aftercare from a
Great.
kink
Yeah.
perspective, and
Please.
then if you could address it from the industry and actor perspective,
Mm,
right? So, aftercare is that what each individual needs to regain equilibrium after kink play or sexual play?
mm,
Think of it like sports. Like after one runs a marathon, if I ran a marathon, which I won't, let's just pretend. If I ran a marathon right afterwards, you wouldn't expect me to put on a clean shirt and go to work or to be able to operate heavy machinery like a car. Um, I
mm,
would need to eat. I would need to, maybe I need to talk about how great I did or that I didn't do as well. And there's all this dopamine and brain chemicals that are doing woo. There's the body that needs rest. There's the brain chemicals. There's my emotion. Uh, Aftercare is what each individual needs, and that can vary. Some people will like to gain equilibrium, right? So, like your daily operating default norm, think of that. One might want snuggles and conversation. Somebody else might want silence. Somebody else might be, I need to be alone and have my cigarette. Um, uh, I One might need food, then one should have food ready, etc. So is that's aftercare from a kink and play perspective. How about for you, Brooke?
yeah, I think honestly, when I came up with the actors warm down, it started with thinking about kink aftercare. Um, and I think people need it, just like you said, in different ways. In intimacy, we call it closure. That's like what the umbrella that it fits under.
Hmm.
Um, and I think just like when I train actors, I say you need to train your body to be disciplined, to do like a dancer, to do the positions required of the scene. You need to be disciplined to know what your boundaries are and be able to articulate them. You also need to be disciplined to know what you need afterward to make this a sustainable career for you. So you need a way to let go of what you'd worked on and go back to your normal life. And for some people, that's a thing they need immediately afterward. Like, I am hungry or thirsty, I need hydration, and I need 5 minutes of silence. For some, it's I need someone to check on me the next day. So sometimes as an intimacy coordinator, I'll call an actor the next day and just check in with them if that's what they need. Because people process things different. Some people are verbal processors and they need to talk about it as soon as it's over and get it out. And some people are like, I want to process it on my own, but then I would love to check in with you tomorrow. So it really depends on who the person is and what they need. And I think just like in kink, you have to ask for the aftercare that you need. Actors have to ask for the closure that they need. And I
Yeah,
can give them
yeah.
options, right? Just like a good dom can give options.
So on I love the parallel. I've actually done some free videos as well as formal class video, free videos and writings on aftercare. We'll put that in the link. Question I ask on aftercare when playing is, what does it entail? Who is it by? And does it go in any phases I need to know about? Which is exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The who is it by is interesting,
Hmm.
right? Like, actors don't always need it from the intimacy coordinator, right? Their closure practice might involve going home, listening to music, taking a bath. Um, I try and encourage it not to involve alcohol or drugs. Like, if that's something you want to do, additionally, great. But for your actual aftercare, your actual closure, to have it be non impaired.
Hmm.
But some people like a glass of wine or something, which is what made me think of that. Um, yeah. And so some people can do it on their own or might have a friend they want to call or their mom. Like,
Massage therapist.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
I've also found when I've done intimacy consulting or styling consulting
Hmm.
that having a colleague friend to get on the phone and obviously things that I can disclose, right? To
Hmm.
go, and mostly it's stuff I can disclose because as you were saying earlier, what did I do great? What could I done better? How
Yes.
does this fit in? And to have that like either positive or negative blah on the phone.
Hmm.
That's that's been nice to be able to talk about. And for example, the I was talking about the photographer, erotic photographer that I worked with, and the experiences that I heard from the performers. I had to call a colleague to share my heartbreak,
Yep. Yeah.
so I wasn't holding it all in.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would say in the intimacy community, we do a lot of that as well, is because the stakes are high often and none of us are perfect. There is a certain amount of like, I need to call someone that does this work and talk to them about what I do, hear if they have any other suggestions. How can I learn to be better for next time? And just someone tell me that I did a pretty good job this time, you know? So, yeah, the colleague thing, that's real.
Mhm. Mhm. Really, really helps. Oh, somebody kindly asked if all the links that we're talking about can be emailed to those who have pre-registered. That's a great idea, and I will do that. The links
Hmm.
will also appear in the description when the video shows up in the Consent Dojo series. So take a look at that, and we'll put the link to the Consent Dojo on YouTube as well as on my site over there. So, and for those of you who already pre-registered, don't worry, I have your email from the registration. Okay. Um, yeah. Now, you were talking about our different power dynamics, but also different identity and intersectionality. Intersectionality is that which means the complications of who we are as people and the different facets of it. So, like intersectionality of me-ness,
Hmm.
uh, Asian American, Japanese American, I'm an immigrant, I am English language learner, I'm queer, I am 58 years old, I am have some not visible um, health and mental health issues, disabilities. I am short. I am an artist. I am, uh, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right. And so intersectionality,
Hmm.
as well as the intersectionality and different values that I carry,
Hmm.
good and bad,
Hmm.
and problematic as all this stuff. So the intersection of things like race, disability, sexuality, body size,
Hmm.
age, uh, how does that fit in with intimacy coordination?
Yeah, I think it goes to the idea of In a ideal world, the person working on the project, the intimacy coordinator, would share the identity of either the actors or the characters in some way. They might not have every single intersection, right? But the primary ones that are part of the story would be great. Or potentially the primary ones. Um, there's an interesting interview in the book with a young actress named Taylor Shawn, who plays the young Neil Long in The Best Man, the Final Chapters. Um, and Kaya Dunn, who is Black, did a lot of the intimacy for that project. And I went on a couple of days because Kaya had family things that she had to do. But one of the things that Tay talks about in the book, and I worked on the scene with Tay, um, was that it was helpful having a Black intimacy coordinator just around things like I don't have to explain to them that I've got a big booty and it might be harder to get my pants off. You know, things like that, someone might just know. And that might seem just about body shape, but that is also something that's very specific to a culture. And I can
Hmm.
learn some of those things as a white person, but it's not the same as someone not having to explain to me and code switch, right? So there is, and The Best Man was a very Black crew, very Black creative team. It was really wonderful. I was one of very few white people on set on the couple of days that I was on set. Um, and I think things like that are when it's done really well. Uh, and a way in which an intimacy coordinator can work if that's not possible is also having a consultant. So, for example, I might be working on a show where, like, I'm doing the whole season of a show, but there's a particular episode that is going to involve a Japanese character and kink. I'm going to call
Mm.
Midori and say, hey, can you join me on set for this week?
Hmm.
Um, I'll deal with the regular cast and the background and blah, 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 blah. But we really need your expertise around this particular part of the story because we want it told really well.
Hmm.
And, you know, I might have some kink expertise, but I don't have nearly as much as Midori. And I don't have a background that's Japanese. So, like, let's get as much as we can together to tell the best story and also to take care of the actor.
Hmm. Hmm. That commonality of identity and intersectionality, I have come across that. And as a middle-aged cis female individual, and with that kind of auntie moniker that's been
Mhm.
coming my way, which I'm very proud of and honored to be called that. I do know that with performers that have been socialized as girls and women, working with male directors, photographers, etc., there are things they don't talk about
Mhm.
and they don't bring up and they don't want to be a bother. And then, but they can tell it to auntie.
Mhm.
And that's really touching. Um, and it's nice to be able to intercede in that. Now, you mentioned about the lesson learned from the the film that you stepped in on. The Best Man, was it?
Mhm.
Okay. So that got me thinking, what are some hard lessons you've learned
Mhm.
along the way?
Well, a lesson that I think is important about what we were just talking about is I think white people have a tendency when we talk about intersectionality to give exactly the example I gave. Something like what I just said, like, I'm working on this show and I bring in Midori for this very special scene. And we need to also recognize that it doesn't mean white is the default and that white people tell all the stories and that people of color come in only to tell the stories in which their identities intersect,
Hmm.
right? That, like, also Midori could have a show and maybe call me in
Hmm.
because there is a non-binary character
Hmm.
thing, right? So I think that's one lesson that I've learned. Hard lessons, time can be coercive.
Mhm.
Um, so you're on set and um, it's an outdoor shoot. You're losing light. It's the end of a, it's one of the last days of shooting. You've got to get this scene in, and the actors maybe aren't feeling totally prepared. What do you do? Um, because there's a lot of pressure to make it happen, and we're running out of time. And so that time can become a coercive factor.
Mhm.
And uh, I've had to learn to like slow my own tempo down
Mhm.
and like let other people, maybe the first AD's job is to keep us on time, right? They can yell at me all they want. And then I send out this slow energy
Ah,
so that the actor has the space to actually be able to consent. And that is a hard thing to do. So I'd say that's a lesson I learned through practice.
yeah.
Um, I think also just I don't know what I don't know,
Mhm.
and I'm not going to do it perfectly every time. But my job is to be as honest as possible about what I am qualified to do at any given time and not pretend there's things I know that I don't and ask for help because it can be when you're fighting for a new industry to exist, you want to be able to say you can do everything. The minute I say, oh, I need a consultant, I need Midori here too, I'm costing the production money.
Mhm.
So, but I have to admit the things that I'm not qualified for and that I
Mhm.
need help with because I doing a bad job is not going to help.
That's an overall everyday life lesson. Oh my God.
Yeah.
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 And the any business pressure to try to solve.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a hard one. Thank you.
Mhm.
And speaking of reaching out to to uh, experts adjacent or outside of
Mhm.
perhaps the film crew or project, um, sexuality educators and
Mhm.
kink specialists, and how we might help the intimacy industry.
I mean, you already are helping the intimacy industry, I would say. I have learned so much of my training because when I was training what there were not schools for intimacy, I was learning from pro doms and sex educators and kinksters. Like that played into my training so much.
Mm,
Um, and I mean, man, I would love for this is a dream, but I would love for sex educators and kink educators to be able to teach in acting schools and train students both in like what intimacy possibilities are around
mhm,
storytelling, but also around talking about boundaries because in the kink community, boundaries are so celebrated.
mhm,
So I think that's the more people you can influence with the joy of boundaries, the sexiness of boundaries, the better.
hmm. Well, I know that myself and certainly me, I can think of many other of my colleagues that I respect would be, gosh, I don't know, if there's like IC conferences,
Mhm.
um, I'd love to come speak.
Yeah. I mean, you and I met because you were speaking at the Intimacy Coordinators of Color conference in New Orleans.
That was such a great event, and I liked that it was
Mhm.
hybrid. That was
Mhm.
nice.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
was.
and I think that was the first of its kind?
It was. Mhm.
Yeah,
There was
yeah,
recently a conference in Berlin that was the
mhm,
second that was done by I think a German intimacy company.
great.
Mhm.
Yeah. Hey, keep me posted on these things.
Yeah,
Conferences, I can put in little applications or
yeah,
queries because
absolutely.
my interaction at the conference in New Orleans, I adored. It was so nice to expand my connections. And then, my hope is on the education side to be able to help more accurate, humane
Mhm,
description of kink sexuality
mhm,
while also encouraging creativity. Because oftentimes, getting stuck in the conventional trope limits the creativity of those who have the storytelling visions,
mhm. Yep, totally. You
which
said a thing when I interviewed you about, oh man, I'm going to paraphrase it now. I think we were talking about flogging, and you talked
mm,
about flogging as making out. Like people, like we think of it's so often presented as like someone is in front and I'm, rather than like, and like that's such a beautiful way to tell that story.
mhm.
And like that's what we need is we need people opening up all these ideas around the ways that stories can be told. So much more beautiful.
A flogging can be like an erotic pair dance.
Yeah.
It can also, depending on the story told, it can be cold, rejecting, and punishing. That's a
Hmm.
story.
Yeah.
And it can also be um, sinuous and seductive as
Hmm.
well.
Hmm.
Yeah. And which leads me to, okay, the kink imagery out there isn't exactly the greatest. It's getting better. Um, Kink is not always represented as, precursor to serial killers, which seemed to have been the trope for a
Hmm.
while. Um, what would you want to see in kink representation in media out there, in popular media? What would you like to see?
I would just love to see one more couples negotiating it for the first time. I would love to see more awkwardness in sexual encounters on in media, no matter what. But also the like, and then I would like to see us go beyond floggers, handcuffs, and blindfolds, and like, I don't know, maybe a little fire play,
Hmm.
maybe a little puppy play. Like let's start doing the things that are considered more taboo and introducing them because media has so much power. Um,
Hmm.
and I'm thinking about how recently there's was a negative connotation around furries, and it was like applied to like children are going into schools as furries. And I remember with my own family, who's very conservative, I had to say, no, nope, that's not what's happening. Let me explain to you what a furry is. If children are going to school and pretending to be animals, they're playing make believe, which also furries are also. But there's a big damage if you were comparing particularly the trans community, which is what was happening,
Mm.
to a kink and making it both negative. Like
Hmm.
there's so many things that are wrong with what's
Yikes.
happening. But
Yeah.
if in media we could have some playful, awkward, fun representation of furries, it would be a lot harder to demonize it.
Actually, okay, this goes a while back.
Hmm.
Was this in the 90s or the aughts? I can't remember. I think it must have been the aughts. Uh, what was it? The forensic show, Las Vegas. Uh,
Not X Files.
CSI Las Vegas.
Okay, CSI Las Vegas. Okay.
CSI Las Vegas had several episodes that,
Uh huh.
okay, so the setup would be, and they actually had a FurryCon episode,
Right.
but they would set it up initially as, murder happens in, and
Hmm.
there's some sort of, there's like pronouns, there's like swingers, there's a FurryCon. This is
Hmm.
in the aughts. It starts in there, and and they show the implication that people assume that it's something's wrong with it, right?
Mhm.
And then there's this one protagonist in there, who's like the lead researcher, who comes in and going, well, actually, consent. And they they've actually, and I'm like, who is on that writing team? Because there was actually an episode where they showed Fakir Musaffar's Body Play magazine on the table.
Nice.
Uh, yeah, CSI Las Vegas. And so there was somebody in there, and not just one person, but the entire story had a um, very sex positive undercurrent. And this is in the aughts.
That's amazing. That's
Um,
amazing.
and us pervs were like getting our little spidey sense going.
Yeah.
And it's this like 45-minute TV show, and it had the little bit of titillation around
Mhm.
sex and kink, but it was always resolved to be some other mundane motivation,
Yeah.
money, relationship, and they would uncouple it from
Mhm. Yep.
the pathologization. And I was like, wait, there's a copy of Fakir on the table. Um, there was a episode of what was that movie where there's this guy who's a fixer? Not a movie, a TV series. Like, it was a big TV series where it was this like very masculine, kind of scruffy bearded guy,
Yep.
scruffy faced guy.
Mm.
Hmm?
I feel like I know what you're talking about, but I can't think of it.
Mainstream TV show that I wasn't watching, but they contacted me and had me sign
Mm.
release because the this fixer dude comes into where somebody was accidentally killed, and he
Mhm.
has to fix it. And he sits
Mm.
down in the victim's room, picks up a copy of My Seductive Art of Japanese Bondage, and is like flipping through it
Nice.
because there was something to do with kinky sex in the death, but
Mhm.
it wasn't like pathologizing. It was like, okay, somebody died during, and he's just like reading my book.
Yep. I
I
love
was
it.
like, oh my God. And so there was this decision where there's a little bit of titillation, a
Mhm.
little bit of a red herring, if you will.
Mhm.
And then it's greed, murder, revenge, relationship, the usual, right? Um, so I thought that was really interesting. The awkward and the negotiation thing. All right. So I've got this video that I did with Zoe Ligon when she had a show, Sex Stuff.
Mhm.
And this is how it went, where she wanted me to come in and do show Japanese rope bondage. And I asked, I will if we can, and for me to do the bondage on her, right? That was the premise is she
Mhm.
would go through and do all of these interesting things like vac beds, whatnot, right? And that she wanted me to do the bondage on her. And now she's a friend and a colleague. We don't have a play relationship. And so I said, I would if you will show the negotiation.
Mm. Mhm.
And her and her team, fully cool, right? And I'll post the link to the video in the chat as well as in the description. So in the video, we show the negotiation of two people who are friendly but not intimate,
Mhm.
negotiating something intimate,
Mhm.
and then having an authentic scene. And that video has gotten a lot of good feedback because of the tenderness in it and
Mhm.
the awkwardness. Here's a scene that I would love to see actually in a
Yeah, tell me.
movie, or it would be a good little TV
Mhm.
episode, a side plot, where you get two Asian Americans, say a hetero Asian American couple,
Mhm.
and they're trying to do the rope bondage thing. And there's this trope that somehow if somebody's Asian, that there's all these assumptions around sexuality.
Mhm.
No, have them like totally ordinary, right? Uh, and they're trying to tie each other up, but they're looking through a book to try to
Yeah,
do this.
totally. Turning the pages. Wait,
And
hold on.
one
Can you
going,
hold this for me?
yeah,
Um,
and they're going, ow, that hurts. Like,
Mhm.
and as a comic moment, as a sweet comic moment. God, I'd love to see that.
That'd be great. That would be amazing.
Mm.
You
Also,
know what?
older people having kink.
Yes. And it not being a comedy.
Right.
You know what I've been watching that I've really enjoyed is Heartbreak High. And I'm a little behind because the second season just came out, and it's not particularly kinky, but there's a beautiful conversation around asexuality in it. That the
Mm.
negotiation of the characters in figuring it out is done so beautifully and with such care over multiple episodes that I'm very excited by the writers of that show.
What's the show again?
It's called Heartbreak High.
Okay.
It's on Netflix.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
You were talking earlier, much earlier, about the boundary with shows that
Hmm.
sexualize minors.
Yep. This is part of where that thought came to me from was this show
Yeah.
because I'm a
Um,
44-year-old watching the show and really enjoying it.
mhm.
Um, and I think it's incredible education, and the characters are high schoolers.
And also not dumbing down high schoolers because high schoolers today are pretty damn sophisticated. I'm like,
Absolutely.
I wasn't like that.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah. Coming from Japan,
Hmm.
the media representation around sexualization of women and girls is terrible. It
Hmm.
is also a culture that is not a consent culture at
Hmm.
all. Uh, and I have met actually this my last trip to Japan, one of two, only two intimacy coordinators in Japan.
Was it Chiho Asada by chance?
No,
Okay.
Toshi was um,
Great. I've met
yeah,
the other.
okay, okay,
Great.
yeah.
Go
So
on.
I met the other,
Yeah.
yeah. So it was really neat to connect, and oh, she. I'm really glad that she loves her work and has like 1,000% energy because that's a big, big journey ahead for them.
Hmm. Yeah, one of
Yeah.
the things told me is that in Japan, like it's not just that actors have trouble with consent, that in the culture, people don't tend to say yes or no. They tend to like kind of walk around.
Oh, it goes something like this. And this is for anything. It could be
Yeah,
like, can we have dinner tomorrow? It would be
yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah.
well, I think that might be a little bit difficult. Instead of saying, nah, I'm busy tomorrow.
Yep, yep,
Yeah.
totally.
See, this is what I left Japan and I found New York.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yep.
Somebody asked, I was curious about, uh, wanted to know if there were certain shows that you had in mind. Let's, so how about other shows that
Mm,
you find delight in how they handle things?
great. I'm so not great at remembering shows. You know what? This is not specific to kink at all, but I just finished watching Baby Reindeer. Have you watched that yet?
Mm-mm. I think I've heard the title though.
Yeah, it's about a character that is stalked, um, and uh, the conversation around sexual assault in the show is one of the most sophisticated examples I've seen. But I'm seeing that the person clarified by saying high school shows that think might have more adult audiences in mind. Oh, like Euphoria,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
or oh, I feel like there's lots of like uh, sports and cheerleader shows. You know, where
I don't suppose Buffy counts as one.
may you know this is terrible. I never watched Buffy because I grew up without a TV. So when it was airing, I didn't have a TV, which is so sad because Eliza Dushku, um, who is amazing, is the sister of Nate Dushku, who directed Birder that we were just talking about. Um, so I should watch Buffy, but they're in high school, right?
Also didn't really watch it.
Yeah, okay. But the things I'm thinking of is like it's a high school, let's say, young woman walking down the hallway, and the camera
Hmm.
pans all the way up her body, very much objectifying,
Mm. Hmm.
right? And like nothing is wrong with objectification. I'm not, but if you're doing that with a child, even though the actor's probably an adult, but for the
Hmm.
adult gaze, I just have questions about it that I am personally dealing with around what are my boundaries around that.
Somebody wrote about Buffy high school age, but also for viewing of that age.
Right. Yeah, that's my understanding is that a lot of my friends watched it around that time.
Hmm.
Um, but I think Euphoria might be maybe is different than that,
Right.
which I
Yeah.
also haven't watched too much of, but it's an example people bring up.
Mm. Now let's see, other kink representation. I want to see older people having fun kink. I mean,
Yeah,
any fun sex, really.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I would like to see kink go wrong and not be a tragedy, right?
Oh, yeah. Not
Like we have
be
to cut the ropes off, and then and then we giggle and we move on.
mm. Or maybe like it leads to like a domestic quarrel of the more ordinary variety.
Yes. Uh-huh.
Um, right. As opposed to chopped up body parts in a 5-gallon
Yep.
drum.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. Uh,
I would
gosh.
love to see a show where there's a couple that has a 24/7 dynamic.
Oh, neat. Yeah. Another writes, I would like to see kink in media that's not necessarily considered sexual.
Hmm.
Yeah. Oh, there was okay, this example is definitely sexual, but and there was a cute comic aspect. What was the Anne Hathaway
Hmm.
essentially kind of mocks her own media portrayal. Was it Widows? No, it's Ocean's 13.
Mm.
And I love a good heist movie.
Hmm.
I love a good heist movie. And I think, and somebody correct me on this, uh, she plays a haughty actress. So
Hmm.
she's mocking the way that
Hmm.
media mocks her. So it's so lovely. But there's a scene in which she's in bed with a lover, and
Hmm.
a male lover who's the handcuffed to the headboards,
Hmm.
and she's in this sexy cute outfit, and she's got a crop.
Hmm.
And no spoilers here,
Hmm.
but they're playing fun sexy games, and it's a subplot of a relationship, and it's like, oh, cute sexy moment, and she leaves them there because it becomes an alibi.
Ah, yep.
And it's really cute and adorable,
Hmm.
and uh I actually thought it was a cute representation of dabbling in
Uh-huh.
spanky spanky,
Hmm. Hmm.
and that they were represented as like incredibly rich but ordinary people.
Hmm. Yeah.
uh, uh,
Poor Things is an example of underage. Oh, see, you loved it. I wouldn't
uh,
watch it.
no, I loved it because it
Okay,
was
tell
a
me.
flipping of Frankenstein.
Mm, hmm.
Frankenstein's monster had a tragic ending.
Ah, okay.
Poor thing uh, is Frankenstein's monster told from a queer feminist perspective.
Interesting. Maybe I need to watch it because when I hear about it, what it sounds to me like is the mind of a child in an
Mhm.
adult body, and that just sounds like assault to me.
Oh, no, no. So brain of
Uh-huh.
okay, there is a a woman who is found. She commits suicide,
Hmm.
right? And her body is retrieved by mad scientist, which, by the way, actually, Willem Dafoe playing beautifully a very complex character.
Hmm.
The reveal on him is interesting.
Hmm.
So the mind is put into a a child's brain.
Hmm.
A baby's brain is put into the adult body, but the the new human is
Hmm.
allowed all the developmental stages,
Oh, got it.
including like throwing tantrums, pointing at a penis.
Hmm.
Um, so it's it's the child without the control of societal mental caging.
Mm.
And she's actually allowed development to a point where she actually throws the brain and the body achieves a rather fast track growing up. And
Mm-hmm.
she gets to a point where she wants to own her sexuality and leave home with this guy. Bad decision, first boyfriend, bad decision. We all have
Hmm.
that. And she explores her sexuality as in her own agency.
Mm.
I did not see sexualizing the child at all.
Great. That's good to know.
And the father, the new father character, the tragic scientist, really, not mad, genius tragic scientist, is concerned
Hmm.
about, is she developing too quickly, and
Mm.
should he let her go with the new boyfriend who's a bad decision, but it's her decision. So he struggles with, how much do I be a father and how much do I let girl become woman?
Interesting.
So that's how I saw it.
I mean, that's an interesting conversation,
Mhm.
right?
And he struggles with, how much does he engage in fatherly authority, and the complexity of, you have a woman's body
Hmm.
with a child brain, a developmental brain,
Hmm.
and we go through all phases of it.
Got
So
it.
yeah,
I think that's the part I didn't know. I didn't know that it went through the phases of development and that it grew up.
right, and it's surrealist. So the growing up, it's quite bizarre.
Mm.
uh yeah, and so there's growing up of, um and she learns to set boundaries.
Everybody loves that.
The whole thing is around consent.
Hmm. That's cool.
When you look at it, the whole thing is about consent, starting with her deciding to, the original person deciding to have to take her own life. So there is
Mm-hmm.
content of suicide, there's
Hmm.
content of straight up sex right in your face.
Hmm.
There's grotesquerie
Hmm.
as well, in that um, steampunk way. Um, there is assault in
Hmm.
there that she navigates. Um,
Yeah, as long as you call it what it is. I don't have
mhm.
a problem with showing assault.
Oh yeah, and um, her life in the past
Hmm.
was beautiful and conventional and proper, and then they peel away the surface of it, and
Mm-hmm.
it's ugly.
Hmm. Interesting.
Yeah, I thought it was challenging.
Hmm.
It's not for everyone, but I think it does track a lot of women's journey of coming into themselves.
All right. See,
So
it's good
that's
to
my
talk
take.
about. I appreciate your
Yeah,
perspective. I'll have
yeah,
to give it a shot.
yeah. There may be some scenes for some people that are like, "Oh my god."
Mhm.
It is done very intensely.
You
Oh
know
my
what?
goodness.
Oh,
Mm,
I
yeah,
would say
go
theme
on.
project we talked about that you liked that I then watched was Polite Society. Just that one
Oh,
little moment of tying with the
the Sorry?
Aries, yeah.
You saw that.
Oh yeah.
Yay.
Yeah.
Mm. Polite Society is this lovely movie that if you like Bend It Like Beckham
Mhm.
and Everything Everywhere All at Once,
Mhm.
you'd love this, and it's got some great martial arts sequence. Now, when I'm watching, movies and shows and they've got bondage in there, I am the worst person to be sitting next to because 'cause I'm like, right? And I rarely see good bondage. Um, well done bad bondage once in a while happens. Like there was a Marvel movie where you see Black Widow. It opens up with Black Widow tied to a chair and going through a classic interrogation by bad guys. She's
Mhm.
tied to a chair, right? And then her phone rings, and bad guy's like, "What?" And and the bad guy's phone rings. I'm like, "Hello?" And uh, it's the whatever the superhero group, yeah, Marvel. Um,
Uh-huh.
and the phone's passed to Black Widow, who in bondage is like, yeah, yeah, I'm working right now. Really? Do I need to be there? I mean, I'm working. And the bad guys are like, what? And I'm looking at this bondage, and it's really terrible. It's just like wrapped around. And what she does is ditches the phone, shrugs off the bondage, and then, ow, like,
Yep.
ah. So that was, I was initially like, another bad bondage. And like,
Mhm.
oh, plot twist. But in Polite Society,
Mhm.
one of the finest bondage scenes and realistic, and
Mhm.
yeah, that it there's no rope.
Mhm.
It is a very effective bondage scene,
Mhm.
and surrounded by terrifying aunties.
Yep.
Yep. So that's so good. Oh, there's somebody posted um about how the Poor Thing intimacy coordinator made all those scenes happen. One article from Vanity Fair. Another article in IMDb News is Emma Stone opens up about the importance of working with intimacy coordinator for Poor Things.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yes, I'm so glad you saw it. And wasn't it a fun movie?
Yeah, it was so fun. I loved it.
I was not expecting that plot twist.
Mm-mm.
Not saying any more about it.
Nope.
So much plot twist. Oh my god, and talking with you is so much fun, and 90 minutes have, woo, flown by,
And there
and
it is.
I wanna do the thing I always do, which is, invite you to give a homework for our viewers.
Hmm. Yeah, we were talking about this beforehand. I thought a fun thing I could offer is an exercise that I give to actors sometimes. And we're going to throw it in the chat. It's a worksheet, and I've given it to acting students, and I've given it to actors who I'm about to work with. Because what can happen, remember when I said time is coercive? If I bring an
Mhm.
actor in on the day of shooting and say, what are your boundaries? And they've never had a chance to figure out what they are, then they might be like, oh, I don't know. I guess I'm up for anything. And then I'll say, great, can I put my toe in your mouth? And they'll be like, well, no. And I'll be like, well, I have choreographed that before. So let's talk through it. So this is a worksheet that we put in the chat for you that I sometimes give to actors in advance so that they can, on their own time, think through how do I want to tell this story? How do I want to be touched? So it talks about giving and receiving of touch, and it talks about different levels, whether it's light or aggressive. So if you would like a thing to try, you can pretend you're an actor. Maybe pick a favorite movie that you like and pretend you're going to be a character in that movie, and then go through the worksheet and see which of those things you would pick for how you would be willing to give and receive touch. and maybe what you think the best storytelling would be.
Mm, I like this a lot. How have your actors you've worked with responded to this worksheet?
It works. Some people love it and they'll say,
Mhm.
I took 4 hours with it. And be like, okay. And some people you can tell they just like boom, 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 boom. So it just depends on what people need. But
Right.
people tend to very much appreciate being given advance notice and the time to figure it out on their own.
Yeah, that is so parallels good sex and good kink.
Hmm.
I invite those who are present and here live, our live guests, to if you would share something you've learned about or something that you got out of our conversation with Brooke. And while folks are writing that down, I want to thank you for taking this time out because I know you're hella busy. Oh, do you have your book you can show?
I do. Here it is. The Intimacy Coordinator's
Yeah,
Guidebook, Specialties for
yeah.
Stage and Screen. This beautiful bookmark was given to me by Jordan Sarah, who's an actor that's starring in The Notebook on Broadway, who was one of my students.
Oh, the
She gave it to
notebook.
me on the night of the
Gorgeous,
release.
gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous. Well, I have learned a lot out of this. The behind the scenes and what it takes. And I'm certainly going to be now looking at shows and movies. I'm a movie buff, you know.
Mhm.
I try not to do TV too much because I can get sucked into it. But
Mhm.
I go to the theater and to be able to I actually watch all the credits. I stay all the way through till the lights come on.
Yeah,
And I'm going to be looking for intimacy coordinators and consultants. I'm also going to be wondering about, I got to read that Emma Stone uh,
same.
intimacy coordinator and Poor Thing. I mean, I'm so curious about that. So thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Midori. It's so lovely spending time with you every time we do.
Yay. Oh, and we have today I learned that intimacy can be learned and planned, organized ahead of time. Uh, it's important more than just behind the scene, it's real life.
Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. I
Thank you.
will be, oh, and shout out to Brooke, great info.
Thank you.
I'm gonna put a cute little title on this, and then I will be posting it and sending you the link. And oh, hi, Indigo.
Indigo, she came just at
Oh,
the very end to say hi. Hi, all.
true, truly a star. All right. Have a good day. Give my love to New York, and I owe you a coffee soon whenever I get there.
Yeah, I look forward to it. Have a great afternoon, or yeah, afternoon where you are.
Yep. All right.
Hi, everyone.
Bye, all.